Judge Grayson assumed he was dealing with an ignorant kid until the defendant began to take the case apart like a practiced attorney. The air inside the Los Angeles County Courthouse was heavy, almost choking. Rows of onlookers packed the gallery, whispering as they watched everything play out. The defendant's table seemed oversized next to the young man standing beside it, hands shoved into his pockets, chin tilted just enough to show he wasn't intimidated. Jalen Dawson, 19, faced charges of grand theft auto and resisting arrest. The accusations were grave, but the look Judge Walter Grayson gave him made it obvious the true contest had little to do with law. Grayson leaned back in his bench, his fingers tapping slowly on the glossy wood of his desk. He peered down at Jalen over his glasses, his mouth pulling into something between a smirk and a snarl. "You think you're some kind of legal expert?" His voice laced with wry amusement. "This isn't debate club material." A few quiet laughs rippled through the courtroom. The bailiff, the court reporter, even the prosecutor, all sharing the amusement. Jalen didn't betray a reaction. He didn't smile. He had spent years getting ready for a moment like this, not this exact one, never imagining he'd be standing as a defendant, but he knew the courtroom down to its bones. While other kids memorized basketball stats, he learned case law. While his friends played video games, he ran mock trials in his head, arguing phantom cases with himself. His mother, Denise Dawson, had been a paralegal for more than 20 years. And Jalen grew up on the stories she brought home. How prosecutors cut corners, how judges showed favoritism, how some defense lawyers hardly tried. By 14, he had soaked it all in. He could dissect a trial better than many law students. None of that mattered to Grayson. To him, Jalen was just another troubled kid. "Let's make this quick," the judge sighed, opening the case file. "I have a golf game at 2. The audience chuckled again, but this time, something shifted. A faint, nearly invisible smirk tugged at Jalen's lips. Grayson had just made his first misstep, though the room hadn't noticed yet. The prosecutor, Mitchell Carrington, rose with the air of a man already victorious. His suit was sharp, his tie neat, and his voice carried the practiced assurance of someone who had delivered this spiel 100 times before. "Your Honor, the state will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant, Jalen Dawson, was caught red-handed in a stolen vehicle, a 2022 Audi A6, reported missing just hours prior to his arrest. Officers chased him through downtown, where he allegedly tried to flee before being taken into custody. His fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. The prosecution submits the evidence speaks for itself." The words landed heavy. The crowd in the gallery shifted, murmuring among themselves. On the surface, it sounded damning. A stolen car, a pursuit, a capture. Judge Grayson glanced at Jalen over his glasses, then back to Carrington. "Go on." The prosecutor moved toward the jury box, his polished shoes clicking on the floor. "The defense may attempt to paint this as a mere misunderstanding, that Mr. Dawson is an unlucky victim of circumstance," he said, locking eyes with Jalen for the first time. "But let's be honest, what kind of victim runs from police?" The room tightened. Judge Grayson leaned forward, chin resting on his hand. Jalen didn't blink. Carrington riffled through a stack of papers. "Your Honor, I have here the testimony of Officer Daniel Ruiz, who personally observed the defendant behind the wheel before he tried to flee. The car was confirmed stolen. The arrest was textbook." Grayson exhaled and nodded. "Sounds straightforward to me." To most people there, it probably did. The case seemed cut and dry. A stolen vehicle, a chase, an arrest. But Jalen had spent too many hours studying trials not to notice the fissures. He stayed quiet, watching, waiting. Judge Grayson tapped his gavel lightly. "All right, let's hear the defense's response." He turned to Jalen's attorney, public defender Lisa Thornton, who had barely uttered 3 words since entering the room. She stood, shifting uneasily. "Your Honor, my client." Jalen put a hand on her arm, a gentle signal. She hesitated, then sat down, and for the first time Jalen spoke. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." The courtroom fell utterly silent. Grayson stared at him, amusement plain. "You will?" Jalen's voice was composed, steady. "I'll be defending myself." A murmur spread. The bailiff's eyebrows rose. Carrington's smirk wavered for a moment before he let out a sharp laugh. This should be interesting. But when Jalen took his first step forward, no one was laughing, because everything was about to change. The weight of the courtroom settled onto him as he squared his stance, hands still tucked in his pockets. He let the hush hang a fraction longer, long enough to make people uneasy. Then he spoke. "Your Honor, Before I begin, I'd like to confirm something with the prosecution. Carrington raised an eyebrow, arms folded. Go ahead. Jalen stepped slowly forward. You said Officer Daniel Ruiz personally saw me behind the wheel before I was arrested, correct? Carrington let out a bored sigh. That's right, and it's recorded in his report. Of course it is, Jalen nodded, then turned to Judge Grayson. Your Honor, I move to strike that testimony from evidence. Grayson squinted. On what grounds? Jalen removed his hands from his pockets for the first time and gestured toward the prosecution's table. Because Officer Ruiz never saw me in that car. In fact, he wasn't even on duty when the chase started. A flicker of confusion crossed Carrington's face. What are you saying? Jalen advanced another step. Your Honor, if the court permits, I'd like to request verification of Officer Ruiz's GPS logs from that night. If his report claims he witnessed me in the vehicle, his location history should reflect that. He let the sentence hang. I suspect it will not. Murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Grayson frowned and glanced at Carrington. Counselor Carrington cleared his throat, jaw tightening. That report was filed by an officer of the law, Your Honor. Are we really going to prefer the word of a defendant over that of a trained professional? Jalen gave a small casual shrug. If the officer was where he says he was, the GPS will confirm it. If he wasn't, he let the thought trail off. Grayson studied him for a long beat, then addressed Carrington. Does the prosecution object to verifying the officer's GPS logs? Carrington paused, long enough for the jury, the gallery, and most importantly, the judge to notice. Jalen breathed softly. He had spent years observing trials, learning prosecutors' methods, how they maneuvered the system. There was one truth he knew. If Carrington truly believed his case was rock solid, he wouldn't be hesitating. Grayson rubbed his temple. Counselor. Finally, Carrington shook his head. No objections, Your Honor. But the shift had already begun. The courtroom stopped laughing. It fell silent, but the tension was loud. Carrington shuffled papers, his polished surety cracking. Your Honor, while we wait for the GPS records, the fact remains the defendant's fingerprints were recovered from the steering wheel of the stolen vehicle. Jalen gave a slight nod, expression unreadable. That's true, he said, stepping forward. But let's examine that evidence for a moment. Grayson raised an eyebrow, motioning him on. Jalen faced the jury, meeting each of their eyes. The prosecution wants you to accept that finding my fingerprints in a car means I stole it. That's the narrative they offer. But let's use reason. He inhaled deeply, voice calm and controlled. Suppose you walk into a department store and try on a jacket. You put your hands in the pockets, maybe zip it up, then return it to the rack and leave. Hours later, someone steals that jacket. Do your fingerprints on it make you the thief? A few jurors exchanged looks. Someone in the gallery muttered. Jalen didn't give them a foothold. The car in question had been parked outside a 7-Eleven hours before the alleged theft. I was inside that store with 3 friends, and yes, when we walked by the car, I leaned on it. I even opened the door because it was unlocked. I didn't think anything of it. I didn't take the car, didn't drive it, didn't steal anything from inside. Just a dumb curiosity. He let the claim settle, then, with a voice like a blade, asked, Does touching something make you a criminal? Carrington cleared his throat, rifling through his notes, grasping for anything to seize control. Jalen wasn't done, and while we're at it, how was that fingerprint analysis performed? He turned to Grayson. Your Honor, was the forensic specialist who handled this evidence subpoenaed to testify? Grayson blinked, caught off guard, and glanced at Carrington. The prosecutor hesitated, then admitted reluctantly, No. Jalen pressed his lips together. So, let me get this straight. The state relies on forensic results to try to convict me, yet they didn't bring in the specialist who processed the data. No chance for me to cross-examine, to probe the chain of custody, to question the accuracy of the analysis. Carrington's jaw tightened. Jalen nodded, as if that settled it. Interesting. Judge Grayson sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose, the expression of a man realizing this would not be the easy triumph he expected. But Jalen wasn't finished. What he was about to say next would change everything. He took a slow step forward, voice steady, firm. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce into evidence an official statement from the owner of the vehicle. The judge frowned. The owner? Jalen nodded. Yes, Mr. Raymond Whitaker, the registered owner of the Audi. He gave a statement to police that, for some reason, was never included in the prosecution's filings. And I think I know why. He turned to Carrington. Do you recall what Mr. Whitaker told officers the night his car was reported stolen? Carrington's jaw clenched. He knew what was coming. Jalen didn't wait for an answer. He produced a printed transcript from his file and read aloud. I left my car running when I ran inside the gas station. Some kid must have jumped in and taken off, but it wasn't the guy you arrested. I saw the kid and he was white. A collective gasp swept the courtroom. Jalen held up the paper. That's from the original police report. The same report the prosecution conveniently never mentioned. He turned back to Judge Grayson. The arresting officer admitted this in his testimony. The prosecution ignored it, and yet they expect this jury to find me, someone who doesn't even match the thief's description, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Carrington lunged forward, scrambling. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The defendant was caught in possession of the vehicle. Jalen shook his head slowly. I wasn't. His voice didn't rise, but it cut through the courtroom with precise clarity. I was arrested blocks away from where the vehicle was abandoned, walking home after getting snacks with my friends. I wasn't in the car. I wasn't near it. I wasn't fleeing. The only link they have is sloppy police work and assumptions. Judge Grayson exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. The case was coming apart, and everyone could see it. Jalen turned back to the jury. The real suspect got away that night. Officers found a black kid in the same general area and decided that was close enough. That's what this case is really about. Silence. Grayson cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Does the prosecution have anything further? Carrington stood rigid, his face flushed. No, Your Honor. Judge Grayson breathed out, looked at Jalen for a long moment, then at the jury. He leaned forward and said the words that would linger in everyone's ears. Case dismissed. A moment of stunned quiet, then chaos. Half the courtroom erupted, some in disbelief, some in quiet relief. Reporters scribbled. The gallery stirred. Jalen didn't move immediately. He let the instant settle, allowed the reality to wash over the room. Judge Grayson, still holding his gavel, regarded Jalen with an expression that was hard to read. There was something new in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps regret. Jalen met his gaze, then headed for the door. Just as he reached it, the judge called, Mr. Dawson. Jalen stopped but did not turn. Grayson hesitated, then added, You should consider law school. Jalen smirked. He didn't need to consider it. He was already headed that way. Outside the courthouse, the air buzzed with voices. Reporters swarmed the steps, cameras flashing, microphones thrust out like bayonets. Jalen, did you know the judge would dismiss the case? What's next? How does it feel to outmaneuver a veteran prosecutor? Jalen pulled his hoodie up, dodging the questions. He wasn't after the spectacle. This wasn't about showing how clever he was. It was about something bigger. His mother, Denise, waited at the bottom of the steps, arms folded, face unreadable. For a long moment she simply looked at him, then finally let out a breath and said, Boy, you scared me half to death. Jalen laughed, scratching the back of his head. Had to take a risk, Ma. She stared a beat longer, then wrapped him in a tight hug. You always were the stubborn one. Cameras kept flashing, but Jalen no longer noticed. Across the street, standing by his car, Judge Grayson watched. His posture changed. The arrogance had gone, amusement replaced by something like reflection. He hadn't expected this case to be anything other than routine, another day, another defendant, another guilty plea. Now he knew he'd remember it. Jalen had done something most people never could. He forced the system to look at itself, and for once, it blinked first. The lesson was obvious. How many other cases had unraveled this way? How many people had been convicted, not because of proof, but because of bias, shortcuts, and a system focused more on closing files than finding the truth? Jalen had the tools to fight back. But what about those who didn't? This wasn't just a single case. It was every case like it. He knew what he must do next. This courtroom wouldn't be the last place he stood. Next time, he wouldn't be the defendant. He'd be the lawyer. And when that day came, he wouldn't stand alone. If this story made you pause even for a second, then share it. The justice system is built on laws, but it's run by people. And people can change, but only if we make them. Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories that matter, and let's keep the conversation going. Because next time, it might not be Jalen. It might be someone you know.